Well said. Thank you, everyone. I'm really pleased to be joining you virtually from San Francisco to really talk about what passions means. How do we create scale-ups? How do we create more jobs and economic growth all over the world? So Startup Genome is an organization that is focused on helping startup ecosystems grow and produce more scale-ups. And we've started in 2011 with Steve Blank, Chuck Easley from Stanford, Ron Berman from Berkeley, now at Wharton, to really develop the first data-driven research of success factors for startups and then of ecosystems. Because before that, we had a lot of theories, but we had not measured how it all works and really be able to separate what we think works but doesn't from what actually works. So for us, it's been a drive to and a mission to really draw proven policies from startup ecosystems all over the world and build a knowledge network where we share them. So it comes from evidence-based research. More than almost 100,000 founders have taken our survey where we codify how they live the ecosystem. We've done the largest research, million startups, the global patent analysis to see what are the drivers of innovation and of startups. And then we did that for 80 cities in depth and more than 250 cities now at the secondary level to really have benchmarks, because until you have benchmarks, you don't have context. You cannot compare what is low, what is high, what is not normal at every stage of an ecosystem. And then bringing execution experience so we can help the governments or the private ecosystem leaders execute those policies, program initiatives to change the game, to increase success. So we work with top policy advisors like Josh Lerner from Harvard Business School and best of breed programs. So we really develop the genome of successful startup ecosystem. And we do that because we want to spread the ability for anybody all over the world to succeed. So it stops depending on where you're located, your gender, your ethnicity, your social background. So we want you to succeed everywhere and stop this concentration that we see. 74% of all value created by startup ecosystems is concentrated in the top 10 ecosystems, and those top 10 ecosystems are in 5 countries. That's a little bit down from a few years ago, but we need to work together so we can flatten the curve. In our work, we've developed the first model to explain how startup ecosystems develop at each stage to understand this is not a linear process, right? There's step 1, there's step 2. So the first phase is activation, then globalization, attraction. And really the performance of all at each phase, what we're trying to produce is more scale-ups, more economic impact. But it's really about community. And my professor, Michael Porter, was talking about that, like the industry clusters, what's happening inside. It's really local. And we define an ecosystem as something that has a 100-kilometer radius. That means you can drive to it. You're the same pool of people and of talent and of VCs, etc. And what drives performance is, of course, accumulating startup experience, which includes, of course, scaling experience. And performance increases with that. But as you can see on the right side of this chart, performance doesn't start at the beginning. Small ecosystem of 200, 300 startups, they don't create scale-ups at any regular, predictable rate. So you need to grow to, in a small city, maybe like Stockholm, Helsinki, 600, 700 startups, but for major cities of 3 million plus, it's really not only until you get 1,000 startups that we can see that you're producing scale up. So the first goal obviously is to grow, and then your goals change. First activating local resources, then globalizing, getting out into the world, and then attracting resources. So what you see is the growth accelerates with exits because tech, more than any other industry, is subject to global competition for resources and markets. So as you start having success, you start attracting resources in addition to accelerating the activation of your local resources. And over time, as you go through those phases, we've seen that the rate of production of scale-ups really increases. And we're the first to develop a standardized methodology that's data science based to count how many startups there are in every city, so we can calculate those ratios that you see here. It's not overpopulation. It doesn't matter whether you have a city of 10 million people or 5 million people. If you have 1,000 startups, you're going to produce according to those predictable ratios. So that told us a lot. And you can see, right, the ratio of early and later stage scale-ups, it really grows through the phases. So the question today is, how can we create an investment environment? And really, when I say an investment environment, it's in the investors, but what is the environment so that the investments actually flourish into scale-ups? And what produce then, therefore, those scale-ups? And of course, resources is important, and I include in resources knowledge and organization that really spread this knowledge or these resources, like investor groups, but also accelerators really working on the knowledge part. And we talk a lot about that, but what's not talked a lot about is bigger is better, bigger ecosystem. And Michael Porter was saying the first element that drives performance of an industry cluster, and startup ecosystems are industry clusters, is size. More players, more resources, more performance. Number two, he said, is connectivity. And it's what we call local connectedness in startup ecosystem speech. And it's really not only the formal relationship, but the informal relationships that's the glue between us, and how we help each other and share information and have access to talent, etc. And the fourth is global connectedness. So this in tech, more than in what Michael was studying. He wrote his book, Competitive Advantage of Nation, in 1990. It was really traditional ecosystems, industry clusters was looking at. In tech, the global community is as important also, to be connected to it. And when you're connected to it, you have access to global knowledge, and then you can start taking global markets, and so what we call global market reach, where you realize your global potential. So if the number one is resources, and you know what they are, but this is our map of the success factors, and I whited out the ones on the right, but on the left you can see the talent, of course, the founder, so what's subject to the team, its experience, but then the funding is capital, but also the skills of the investors, and the organization are these accelerators that bring knowledge. But what's important to understand is there's no silver bullets. When you look at the integration phase ecosystems, you can see that they're balanced. They've worked on all their success factors. And when you see ecosystems that have big gaps, like Singapore, they're very great at some things, but at others they have gaps, and that prevents then the production of scale-ups. Another point is that we often talk about late stage funding, early stage funding with Series A, B, but really it starts at seed. And what we've discovered is the funnel of fast-growing startups start with seed funding. When you look here, you see that the percentage of seed-funded startups is extremely highly correlated with the percentage of exits. So that's the beginning of the funnel, and we often forget to start developing funding, the angel groups, the angel investors, the early stage of seed capital. So resources start very early. Number two, as I said, size matters. So you can see here the exit value on the y-axis and the number of startups, very simple metric of size on the x-axis. And you can see the exponential power of having more startups creating exponentially more exits. Number three is local connectedness. So what we've developed is a way to measure the community. We talk a lot about the culture, but what we wanted to measure is, can we measure how culture actually happens, how it actually acts to help each other? And we have very simple questions like, how many hours did a founder help you in the last 2 weeks? How many hours did an investor that did not invest help you? How many people can you call on for help? You have a quality relationship with. And when we did that with 5,000 startups, having their sales numbers, their number of customers, their growth rate, we realized that those that were more connected and worked in an ecosystem that was helping each other more saw their revenues grow 2 times faster. So that's where the power of me as a founder, developing community around me, helping others so that they help me, so we learn from each other, helping them hire, helping them have access to investors so that they also do it in the future. And also telling us things that You know, sometimes we feel like we network and it doesn't have value, but sometimes it's worth millions of dollars, one sentence. And it was true of me. One of my startups was a great failure. It was a web health startup. I was not an expert in health. And a year after I started, with money from Sequoia, a founder that had $100 million exits, someone in a conference said, you know, you're the 8th startup that I see doing this business model. And they're not here today because they're all dead. And I was like, wow. If I'd been connected, someone would have told me that a year ago. I wouldn't have started that startup, or I've done things differently. So, you know, yeah, networking, it seems like it's not immediately sometimes useful, but it's worth millions, and it's going to really drive the growth of your startup. And when we all do this together, now suddenly the whole ecosystem lifts off. So what we do together is more important than what we do alone. And I always bring back Zuckerberg, right? If Zuckerberg had been in Lagos, he would not have been able to develop Facebook. There's no chance in hell. Less than 1% maybe, right? So Silicon Valley developed Facebook. Zuckerberg is important, but it's the skills, the engineers, the growth hackers around him, the investors around him with a lot of expertise that made Facebook possible, because Silicon Valley is a strong ecosystem where we help each other. There's a lot of resources. So very important to know that. The fourth factor is the bigger we, this group. You would have said, I'm building a social network, and it's going to become the #1 media empire in the future. And you would have explained to you why, and I said, wow, okay, I get it. This is important. Maybe I should pay attention. Maybe I should do something like that, right? So the global fabric of knowledge is this flow of information between entrepreneurs. So when you're connected to people in Silicon Valley, suddenly you have access to all of the knowledge from all over the world, because people from Singapore, Berlin, all over the world go pitch, go try to sell in Silicon Valley. They do it in London and New York. So these three especially. So for you, being connected to those help you understand what's going on in my space all over the world. So you don't have to go visit 50 countries to know, right? These are nexus of knowledge in the middle of our global fabric between entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs, we help each other. We give each other customer introduction, investor introduction, employee introduction. The investors don't do that at the same rate, right? So it's important to be connected globally. So the more you're connected globally, the higher is your potential to create a globally leading business model, because you know the other ideas and the other startups that are being done. You know that you're not going to copy something that's already been done and that's 5 years ahead of you. You're not going to waste your time, or 2 years ahead of you, before it's published, before it's in the news. So it's really important that you're connected. So this is global connectedness, is, you know, the scale up potential. I know what's going on in my space. I have no people who know, and therefore I have my idea has scale up potential. It's new, it's fresh, it's building on the global knowledge in my space. But then you need to take it outside, right? This is the fifth factor in creating scale ups. And as Steve Blank would say, and as Eric Ries would say, if you want to develop a global product, you need to talk to global customers in day one. Don't develop product based on local customers, right? So you see the relationship at the ecosystem level between these two factors. At the bottom is scale up potential. The y-axis is you realize your global potential by early on, before it's sales and marketing. As you develop your product, you achieve global market reach. You get out of your country, you get out of your continent to talk to customers and say, is this really top of mind for you as a need? How can I improve it? And when we see startups, and it looks like conceptual charts, but these are all based on actual data. We had, I think, 3,000 startups to draw this chart, where we had their revenues, we had their number of customers. And we saw that those startups where the founders were more connected and went outside of their country right away, with having more than 50% of foreign customers early on in year 1, year 2, they were growing 2 times faster their revenues, actually 2.1 times faster. So global connectedness enables global market reach, but you need to take action and do it. And when you do it, you grow a lot faster. You know your competition, you know the market needs all over the world, and you can attack the global markets. So finally, let's go back to, I've talked about creation of scale-ups, right? 50 million worth 100 million, but now we're talking about how do you create billion-dollar corporations, and for us, it's about creation of global category leaders. We're trying to stop using this word unicorns, a little bit of a hype word, but how do you create leaders? Well, first, a lot of countries, a lot of cities have created unicorns. More than 80 now cities by now have created at least one unicorn. The problem is 74% of them were created in the US or China. So again, it's not spread out. And again, going back to the global category leaders, it's not about creating a startup that's theoretically valued $1 billion. It's about creating a leader where you have a new business model and you seize global market leadership, like Mark's going to talk about with Netflix here, and reach $100 billion in market value, creating tens of thousands of jobs. That's really what we want as founders, is what we want as societies also. And when we look at the global startup revolution, it's created global category leaders more than any other industries in the past. 5 out of the 10 largest corporations were created by what I call startup ecosystem, people helping each other around accelerators, investors, mentors, angels. And it's not true of Microsoft and Apple, so I don't count them. They're tech, right? But they were not created in the advent of the internet and the global startup ecosystem. But I went back 100 years with my team to see how many top 10 companies did the telecom have in this heyday, the computer industry, the automotive industry, the semiconductors. Nobody had ever had more than 3. So we're changing the world. It's never going to be the same. Right? The startup ecosystem are the ones, the engine that creates those leaders. And now the question is, how do you create those global leaders? So when I talk about billion-dollar clubs, it's billion-dollar exits, IPOs, or M&A, and unicorns. So casting the net a little bit broader. And Stockholm was the impressive ecosystem the last few years. And we're wondering in 2017, what do they do? Because they rival Silicon Valley in their rate of production of billion-dollar startups per 1,000 startups, right? It's a ratio. And we're wondering, some people were like, maybe it's their design. They have great design skills. And I'm like, not sure that design skills are going to explain it, And when we looked closer, we realized that they were very connected. And they were connected because their founders travel. They jump in a plane 2 or 3 times a year to go to London, New York, Silicon Valley, Singapore, to learn what was going on, develop relationships, understand their space, and take leadership. And then they started selling outside, not only of their country, but outside their continent at a rate that rivals Silicon Valley startups. So connected and global market reach early from the onset. That's very important. When we look at Singapore, that's created only $2 billion clubs from local founders, right? They attract billion-dollar and fast-growing startups from other cities, but are they able to create them from the onset? And you can see that Singapore startups and the accelerators are telling their startups, we're looking at the left, is a study that we did of accelerators and how the accelerated startups compare to the non-accelerated startups. And you can see that the accelerated startups in Singapore, unlike any other cities, go global less because they're told stay in Southeast Asia. And if you focus on Southeast Asia, you don't create global category leaders. And you see there's the percentage of their startups that say, I'm going global right away, much smaller than Tel Aviv, Austin, Berlin, London. So this is the key ingredient. You need to get out. You need to start early. If you focus on a national market to develop your product, you're developing a national product, not a global category leader. Looking at Tel Aviv, right, which is amazing at creating early scale-ups, but have not been able to create billion-dollar companies, like a very small ratio of billion-dollar clubs, right? Is the opposite. For them, they didn't have a lot of scaling skills. And Stockholm did it because they were a small city with a lot of global family businesses. So they had the scaling skills, the global market reach skills around them in a small city of less than 2 million people. So that really transferred to the tech ecosystem. For Tel Aviv, they didn't have that, so they have to develop it or attract it, and it's very difficult. London had it, but they still felt the need to develop, what is now the best scale-up peer mentorship program in the world, Future 50, to teach each other how do you scale a big business. In Silicon Valley, people go from company to company. I know the number 2 of growth at Google, who now left, a couple of years ago to do it at Square, right? It's these few people that build a company and grew a company from 100 employees to 5,000 employees in 2 or 3 years. Incredible. So Tel Aviv now has created a growth forum to support peer learning among their startups. So that peer mentorship, the scaling skills is very important if you're going to go from creating $100 million startups to telling your founder, don't sell out. Hire those C-level executives that know how to take you 10x, 100x bigger. And let's keep doing it. Let's keep at it. Thank you very much.